everyone for coming out on a Wednesday evening to hear me talk about my book. I really appreciate it. You guys are helping me do my first public book event. So I had a private event in July, but thank you for sharing this first public event. And thank you to CFI for hosting it. I really appreciate that. So I'm going to ask for a little bit of patience because we've had to MacGyver my slides presentation because my Bluetooth would not work. So I'm going to just jump right in, and if there are questions that are up spontaneously, feel free to interrupt. If I say something or you have a question about something that's in the slide, I'll do my best to respond and give you an adequate answer. So here we go. So I'm going to start a little bit about me because I'm kind of a newbie in the whole movement. So I am a cradle Catholic. So there might be other cradle Catholics in the room, which means you were reared to be a Roman Catholic and you endured the indoctrination that comes with that type of childhood. As a cradle Catholic, I was one of those very devout children and devout adults. I must have been if I ended up in seminary. And so that's a little bit of a roundabout story. I do talk about that in my book, but I'll give you the cliff notes of it, which is this. At the age of 18, I decided I wanted to be a nun. And lucky for me, my mother had a ton of contacts in this particular convent. And so I went to speak with a mother superior at the convent. She took me out for lunch. I remember this meeting so succinctly because I remember what I ate. I don't remember how long it took, but I remember eating my meal and listening to her talk and being kind of transfixed on what the counsel that she was trying to extol. And what she said to me was that you need to go study some theology. And I thought, okay, well, that's a good thing to do. I'm graduating from school soon. I'm registered to go to university, so I'll take some theology courses. And so that's what I did. I started off as a graduate student at St. Francis Xavier University in Antigonish, Nova Scotia. I don't know if any one of you know St. FX, but that is my alma mater. And that's where I got my undergrad in theology, believe it or not. So my first course in theology was really mind-blowing, right? When you live in a very insular religious community and a very insular religious family that's very controlling, you have lots of questions about God, lots of ideas about what's in the Bible. Like I'm like, what is it with Lot and his wives and his daughters, and why is there all this upheaval? Things don't make sense in the Bible. It's so repetitive. I had all these questions, but nobody could answer them. And theology gave me those answers, particularly in my undergraduate. I really kind of exploded with delight at being able to find answers to those questions, which I think is what keeps a lot of theologians in the academic world, is because it is kind of interesting and fascinating. So, all right, aside from my Catholic upbringing, there's this issue, my mother, who's very, very Catholic and very conservative. I mean, she did pilgrimages to Rome and the Holy Land and places like Medjugorje. I don't know if any of you know about Medjugorje and the charade that is the visionaries that say they talk to the Virgin Mary every day. So that is kind of the upbringing that I had, was this very ultra conservative. I usually refer to it as Catholicism from the Middle Ages. And actually, some people refer to it as the Pentecostal Catholicism because it's of the Spirit, and so my mother was involved in all of these Curcio movements, and so she put me in the youth group and she put me in the youth camps, and so the indoctrination was really, really heavy. So my mother, we'll move on from that because of that's about all I can say. Now, the Clergy Project, there's a big gulf between me being this Catholic, going off to seminary, studying theology, and now I'm an atheist. It's kind of a very odd turn of events. Most people don't think that this sort of thing happens. I did not think that this sort of thing happened. In fact, after I graduated from the Toronto School of Theology's program in 2004, I thought I was an anomaly. I didn't understand how I could go through all of this education about God and turn out and not believe in God. It just made me feel like there was something wrong with me. And so I kind of hid and was like, put my energy into finding a new career, which is kind of a frustrating experience after you've dumped a bunch of money into a master's degree that's not really worth anything to you. Like, I wasn't going to go and work for the separate school board. I mean, that turned my stomach, and I wasn't going to go work for a Catholic hospital and have to deal with a dominating jerk of a priest as my superior, right? So, I mean, I had learned, I had those experiences already. So I basically just kind of didn't tell anybody I'm an atheist. And the first person that I told that I was a graduate of a theology program of seminary and an atheist was Sam Harris. And that's a really interesting story, yeah. I am trying to figure out, what am I going to do? Well, I'm kind of good at writing. I have some friends that are in corporate communication. They're telling me I should do X, Y, and Z. So I ended up working at the Moses Neimer's Idea City. Everybody in Toronto has heard of that. I was
Could you say that again?
Moses Neimer's Idea City.
Yeah.
So this was, I think, in 2007. Yeah, so that was, I believe, the year 2007. So anyway, I was excited. I was going to do something new. I was building my network. I was going to get a new career and leave theology and everything behind. What ended up happening was one of the speakers was Sam Harris, and I had never heard of him. And this was just after The End of Faith came out. So he wasn't as well known then as he is now. Definitely not. I don't know who he is. Sam Harris. He is... what is his official title? He's
New atheist.
Well, he's a new atheist, but officially he's a neuroscientist. And so he's an author, a neuroscientist. He wrote, his first book was The End of Faith, and then Letter to a Christian Nation. He wrote a book about morality. His latest one is called Waking Up. It's about basically meditation or non-spiritual meditation. And it's interesting. I haven't finished it yet. I'm still working my way through it. So yeah, so he's one of the Four Horsemen, that video series that was done by the Richard Dawkins Foundation. And so at the time, I didn't know who Sam Harris was. And I went up to him after his presentation and said, that was really great. You know, I saw your presentation. It was really inspiring and energetic. And I said, but I got to tell you something. I have, master's degree in theology. And he's like, and I'm like, no, you don't understand. I'm an atheist. That's kind of how I said it. And he was just like, okay, that's very interesting. So that was my first coming out experience as an atheist. And I think it's a pretty good one, actually. So that's how I finally started talking about my lack of belief. And it actually wasn't until after I had a child that I was like, what am I going to do? I don't have a moral authority to connect with or community to connect with for my son. How am I going to rear him? What values am I going to educate him in? And I just was completely and totally a neophyte in that. And then I started researching humanism, and I went to a humanist group, my first meeting, and it was really kind of a very funny coincidence. At this meeting, there was a presentation, video presentation of an event in Montreal. And at this event was Daniel Dennett, and he was giving a really lovely presentation. And I kept sitting there thinking, wow, he kind of reminds me of Santa Claus, but he seems really friendly. Actually, we had some fun with that on Rational Doubt last Christmas. Anyway, I'm digressing. So I'm listening, paying attention, then all of a sudden he dropped just this comment, oh yes, like the preachers who are not believers in our study. And I went, what? What are you talking about, preachers who are not believers? What is this? I was kind of in my mind clamoring around and thinking, where is the study and how do I get a copy of it? And I can't believe this is the case. There are more people out there like me. And so I waited till the end of the presentation, and then they had printouts of the study from Tufts University. The title of the study is Preachers Who Are Not Believers. Excuse me, my allergies are driving me crazy. Excuse me 1 second. Preachers Who Are Not Believers. And he did the study with Linda Lascola. So I read the I thank you. I appreciate it. All right. Please excuse me. All right. So I went and I read the study, and I immediately emailed Dan Dennett, and I'm like, hey, this is me. I am this person in this study. Are you doing another study? Because it's me. Hello, I exist, and so do others. And so he emailed me back almost instantaneously and put me in contact with Linda Lascola. And at that time, there was no Clergy Project. There was just these wayward atheist clergy kind of out there on their own in their little silos like me, thinking they were the only ones. And it was a couple of months afterwards that, with the help of the Richard Dawkins Foundation, the Clergy Project was founded. So I became the first executive director as one of the original founding members of the Clergy Project. And sorry, I've kind of gone all over the place, and it's still a picture of me. And I'm also now working with Linda Lascola on Rational Doubt, but I'll tell you more about that in a minute. Is this the right slide? No, it won't go back. Okay, I guess it is. Yeah, okay, so this is a little excerpt from the book. I'll just read this because it might be a little small, though I think that's okay. This is from the prologue. I am a voice of one crying out in the wilderness. And I specifically used quotes from the Bible that I thought worked for me, because why not use what I'm familiar with? It's a truly radical experience for a clergy person to admit that their beliefs in the faith that they have long articulated have lost their meaning. It is more than the dark night of the soul. It is the utter abandonment of a worldview that, after thorough study, reflection, and lived experience, fails to withstand critique both intellectually and emotionally. It is a revelation that uncomfortably exposes the internal architecture of self-delusion and the social and religious constructs that buttress these imaginative ideologies. It is a journey that all members of the Clergy Project have taken, myself included. So, let's see. Please go. Did it move? Yes, it did. It's because I'm looking at this and it's not moving. It's freaking me out a little bit. Okay, so I've been really lucky with the book to get a lot of support. If you didn't notice on the cover, there's a little name at the bottom that says "Forward by Richard Dawkins." And that was a really great day, let me tell you, when I got that email. Aside from Richard and his foundation helping with the Clergy Project, he's been very supportive of me personally, and I really do appreciate that. It's been really wonderful. One of the other people that's been a great supporter, and this is more recently, is Gerald Posner, and he wrote this fantastic book that if you haven't read, you should read because it'll infuriate you. It's called God's Bankers, and it's about the history of corruption within the Vatican Bank, and I couldn't put it down. It reads like a murder mystery / crime novel. But it's all real, it's all details. He spent 9 years researching this book. So to have someone of this level sing the praises of my book has been really tremendous. So I'm gonna skip through that and then another really wonderful person is Andrew Copson, who's the new president of the IHEU and the executive director of the British Humanists. So they've done a lot to support me as well and support the book. So I really do appreciate that. And these are my little shout outs. And here's a little excerpt from the foreword. I'm just going to read this a little bit for you guys. Catherine's book will serve to stiffen the resolve of those still in the closet, and the 600 who have so far joined the Clergy Project must surely be the tip of a large and still swelling iceberg. It will also serve as a warning to those who might otherwise have been lured, called, as they might put it, into the blind alley of commitment to the career that she has thankfully renounced. The good things that clergy sometimes do, fostering good fellowship and community, charitable work, education of a non-religious character, can be achieved in secular ways, without supernatural nonsense and without dictatorial hierarchies. Here, as elsewhere, Catherine Dunphy serves as a role model and her book as a beacon of hope. So, thank you, Richard. All right, so this is the Clergy Project. This is information on the original group and the original founding. So, it's a confidential. So you can't know, but yes.
Question. Do you have other religions like Jews or
Yes.
Hindus?
I'm going to get to that, I promise. That's in my notes. So it's a confidential online community for active and former clergy who do not hold supernatural beliefs. That's kind of the Cole's Note version of it. So it launched in March 2011 with 52 founding members, of which I am one of the original. And these are the founders, as we refer to them, who helped the project to get started. We have here, of course, Dan Barker. I'm sure people know who Dan Barker is. He's the president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. And he's also former clergy, evangelical. The woman next to Dan is Robin Elizabeth Cornwell, and she's a former executive director of the Richard Dawkins Foundation. Now, if it wasn't for Elizabeth, oops, it went too far, and I can't go back. All right, I'm just going to do this here. If it wasn't for Robin, I don't think the Clergy Project would have gotten off the ground, because every ounce of energy that she could give to it, she gave. And she had the Richard Dawkins Foundation staff working on setting up the projects, building the website, making sure it was secure, reaching out to the membership. So I owe her a very big debt of gratitude. The other gentleman, who you no longer see because I'm not very good at trying to balance two different pieces of technology, is Richard Dawkins. And of course, last summer I was at the World Humanist Congress in Oxford, and I had the opportunity to thank him publicly for what he did, because if he had not said, no, my foundation is going to be the organization that helps get the Clergy Project off the ground, we probably wouldn't have gotten off the ground. So again, you know, he's a lightning rod for the entire movement. Then there's Dan Dennett, who has been a tireless supporter of the project, which, you know, he's done with the research that he's done with the last person on that page, which I can no longer get back to, which is Linda Lascola. So now I'm on to this page, which is a profile of Clergy Project members. And so it kind of looks like Pac-Man. I'm realizing that now. The overwhelming majority of members of the Clergy Project, and there are close to 700 now, it kind of changes every day, are alumni. We could refer to them as alumni. It doesn't mean they graduated. It means that they were clergy persons, like myself, and they're no longer. So about 25% are current active clergy persons. And so they come from, let's see here, I'm realizing that I should have ordered these slides a little bit differently, but you know, so be it. So here's a profile based on liberal conservative. It kind of looks like a peace sign. This is really kind of funny. I'm looking at this now in a totally different way. So we have about 35% that are evangelicals or conservative. And that could mean that they're evangelical Christians, evangelical Jews, conservative Muslims. Like it just is a basic breakdown. There is, unfortunately, 41% that are non-declared, because when we started the project, it was so ad hoc that we weren't initially capturing data. We also were worried we don't want to expose people. And so it took us a while to figure out how we're going to capture the data, because we want to know, right? And I'm sure other people want to know. And so it's still not a necessity to make these declarations on the private forum, but you can if you so wish. And then 25% are mainline liberal Protestants. I think most people are really surprised that evangelicals and conservatives make up a bigger proportion than liberals, because you think, oh, okay, if you're United Church or Anglican, you're one of these mainline easy Protestant congregations, it would be an easier transition, when actually it's more difficult, because it's easier to hold on to your faith when you can spout God-ish talk versus, you know, the Bible isn't the inerrant word of God. You know, it's very black and white. So, all right, so this one is where I've got some breakdown. You can't really, I'm not sure if you can really see it very well, but it's a breakdown of geographic location. The majority are in the United States. And that makes sense because it's mostly a North American phenomenon. And also because I also think that the strong evangelicalism and the struggle between church and state in the U.S. plays a really big role in this. And also because it's promoted. The atheist movement is really strong in promoting this, has been really strong in promoting the Clergy Project in the U.S. So Canada has about, let's see, 4%. So we do have a considerable amount per capita of members from Canada. We do have members in the Middle East. And that includes Israel and like Iran and those type of places. I can't disclose exact locations because people's lives are in jeopardy, unfortunately. Okay, let's see here. Let's move on to this one, which is even more complicated. So, religious orientation. I use that word purposefully because I think that it's a persuasion. People end up in the religious environment that they were reared. So this, let me just see if I can find these notes because it will make more sense if I actually refer to them. Okay, so the majority of members would be in the evangelical denominations. But the big chunk that you see right here, unfortunately, are undeclared. Okay, the 41%, and that's because not everybody is required to declare, or nobody's required to, if you so choose. So I'm just going to list off some of the different denominations. We've got Anglicans, Episcopals, Baptists, non-denominational Bible, Buddhists, United Church of Canada, Catholic, United Church of Christ, Jehovah's Witnesses, Jewish denominations, conservative and Orthodox, Lutheran, Mennonite, Methodist, Mormons, Muslims, all denominations, Sunni and Shiite, Nazarene, Orthodox, Pentecostal, Presbyterian, Quaker, Salvation Army, Scientology, the Church of Scotland, Seventh-day Adventists, Unitarians, Vineyard, Wesleyans, Wycliffe translators, others, and then the non-declared. So you can make a song with that, That's a lot. I was thinking I might do that, but I didn't have enough time. So pretty yes.
Sorry, what's the percentage of Jehovah's Witnesses on there?
Jehovah's Witnesses.
They're all ministers.
Yeah, it's not large because we only have about 1%. So the Jehovah's Witnesses would be one of these groups right here. So it's a small number. The majority, let's see here, let me give you the percentage for, say, like non-denominational, Lutherans are 12%, and Pentecostals are 8%, right? So Presbyterians are 4%. Catholics are 6%, but if you lumped all of the evangelicals together, they would be the larger of the group. So, because the Vineyards and the Wesleyans and the Seventh-day Adventists and the Jehovah's Witnesses, yes.
Have you broken it down by age?
No, we have broken it down by gender. And I don't have that in this presentation because it would look kind of pitiful. But I will say this: the majority of members are male, and there's a reason for that because the majority of people who are ordained or who attend seminary are male. So we do have nuns. One of the nuns former nuns that we have, her name is Mary Johnson, and she is a former missionary of charity. She lived and worked with Mother Teresa for 20 years, and she wrote an amazing memoir called An Unquenchable Thirst, where she talks about what it was like to live with Mother Teresa. And let me tell you, it's nothing like, well, maybe it's just like you really imagine, but it's nothing like most Catholics would imagine. So, there's a lot of really great writers in the Clergy Project, and I could have an entire book list, and I'm feeling that I did a bad job in not including everybody's books, but I ran out of time, and 5-year-old and school starts, and that's how it happens. Okay, do we have any other questions on membership? Because I'm going to move on back to the book.
Okay. I was going to ask you, Catherine, about nuns being in there because my best friend, he married a nun, and she's a bigger atheist than I am today.
I would think so.
Could she join that?
She could, yeah. If she's interested in joining the Clergy Project, she can go to their website. Their public site is theclergyproject.org. That's a public site for it, so people can make an application. So I'll tell you a little bit about that application process before I move on. So as most people would expect, because it's a private members only site, anonymity and privacy is kind of the cardinal rule.
She had a brother that was
A priest?
a priest as well. He's out too.
Yeah.
They had a very domineering mother.
Yeah, Catholics seem to have lots of domineering mothers. Yeah. Yeah.
It was very interesting listening to her talk about being in the convent and stuff.
Yeah,
Talk about how they used to whip them, nuns would whip themselves. And all
Yeah.
kinds of stories you wouldn't believe.
Yeah, I would believe it. I would believe it. Yeah, yeah. So it's definitely being a nun is in my opinion, as someone who thought they had a vocation to be a nun, I say that being a nun is proclaiming your status as a second-class citizen in your faith. And people might disagree with me and say, oh no, nuns fulfill their role. Well, yes, they fulfill the role the church allows them to fulfill, and they dictate, as we saw, with the nuns on the bus thing in the U.S., right? With the papacy trying to control and extol its desires and its appreciation and opinions on what's virtuous about being a nun on these different congregations. But anyway, I'm not going to digress into that. I just wanted to touch a little bit more on what the process is like in case you know people who are interested. So what they first would do would be go to the Clergy Project website, which is www.clergyproject.org, and you would find Join Us on the I don't have a picture of it because I can't show it to you. I mean, you can find it, but I don't like to share that information publicly. But I will say if someone is so directed, they can go there. And you would fill in an application, indicate, who you are, your real name. You'd have to give your real name, and say, what your background is. I was a professor of theology and biblical studies, and at a Baptist college, right? That sort of thing. And then you'd fill that out, and it would be emailed to a screening committee. There's a committee of volunteer members of the project. Everything that's done for the project is done by project members. So no one outside gets any access to anything in the private forum. And so this team of screeners would contact you, set up a time, and do an interview, and they'd have a series of questions, which I can't divulge. And then they would do a background check of sorts. And then based on that information, they would discern as a group who was viable or who they thought was a viable candidate. Because as you might expect, some people want to infiltrate, right? They'd like to infiltrate, expose people that are in the closet. And that's one of the reasons why we recommend that people on the forum do not use their real names. So just use a pseudonym and don't put your picture up, and don't say, you can say generally where you are, but don't say, here's my address or here's my private email. We recommend that people don't do that because we don't want people to be exposed, because the potential can be very dire in certain circumstances. One example that I'll give you, and it may be one that you already know, is Jerry DeWitt, who is a former Pentecostal out of not Baton Rouge, sorry, that's the head of his state, DeRidder, Louisiana. And Jerry had left his Pentecostal ministry and was working for, I think it was the town, that's the mayor's office, yeah. And he posted a picture of him standing, his son Paul on one side, and him standing there, and this guy in the middle. And the guy in the middle was Richard Dawkins, and he posted it on Facebook. And somebody who he knows recognized who Richard Dawkins was. And because of that, they told everybody, and he lost his job at City Hall, and he became like a pariah. No one would talk to him. He is the, atheist of Beauregard Parish. So he almost declared bankruptcy, nearly lost his marriage, lost almost all his friends, some of his family. So, I mean, that's a U.S. example. If we had someone in the Middle East, say one of the imams or a mullah, then we could be having a situation with what's going on in Bangladesh right now, and we don't want any harm to come to members of the project. So when it comes to people like me who are out there talking about, hey, this is me and this is my experience, that's seen as one-on-one individual decision. And so we don't say, if you want to come out, right? Here's a big event. Do you want to come out at American Atheist? We don't recommend that because there's lots of ways that ends up backfiring on people, and it ends up backfiring on the Clergy Project, and it just becomes a big, huge mess. So if you're going to come out, then let's have you need a strategy and talk to people who've already done it. And we do call it coming out because I think there's nothing wrong with saying you're coming out of the atheist closet, because it is a big deal when you're a clergy person to come out. So that's any other questions about the process? I'm going to move back to the book. Okay, so, sorry, there we are. All right, so I put in the table of contents just so you can see that I was trying to have a little bit of fun with the book. So part 1 is Genesis. And my inspiration, believe it or not, for the table of contents for the book is a work of biblical scholarship on Genesis, the book of Genesis in the Bible, by a German scholar named Bergerman. I don't know if any of you are familiar with him, but it's a really awesome read in the interpretation series on biblical criticism. So I liked how he organized things, and I also liked the idea of talking about the development of the project and my experience in kind of biblical terms, because it just feels like a good fit. So part 1 is Genesis, a prehistory, and then we move on to, one second here, there we go, Exodus. And in Exodus, I'm talking more about what that process of leaving faith is about, and I'm actually going to read an excerpt from chapter 5 in just a few minutes. So, and the last section is Revelation, of course. So that's my little tongue-in-cheek table of contents, and I am going to do a short reading for you now, if that's okay. I'm going to have a seat, and we'll see how this goes. Okay. Ugh. Can you hear me on the mics okay? Okay. All right, so thinking through faith. Wisdom cries aloud in the street. In the markets she raises her voice. Proverbs 1:20. I loved going to Mass. Walking up the steps of the church I attended every Sunday morning was a comfortable ritual that drew me to the sanctuary. Inside, the atrium consisted of a smattering of stained glass above the entry doors. In the middle of the room stood a large Calcutta marble font, its hue golden, with intricately carved doves chiseled by a long-dead artisan. I would reach out my hand, and the slight movement would ripple the water. Methodically, I made the sign of the cross and reaffirmed the sacrament of my baptism. Each step inside the church called me to focus, to tune out the world, and to draw my attention to the transcendent. The structure of the church echoed this. From the heavens, the formulaic architecture clearly showed the shape of a cross. I loved the idea of seeing our cruciform offering from on high. It made me think that we were clever. Moving into the nave, rows of oak pews filled the space from the entry to the rail at the bema, beyond which stood the altar. It was a single piece of carved golden marble, like the font. The top was draped by a bright green antebellum, upon which was embroidered Pax Christi. My eyes leapt to the back of the church, behind the altar where the tabernacle stood in all of its glory, a 10-foot-tall golden warehouse for the transubstantiated bread. This was my Sunday morning ritual. This was the place where I first cultivated a vocation to religious life, where I came for consolation, and where now as a heretic, I no longer wish to tread. I understand the intimate and intoxicating influence of faith. It lulls anxiety, promising resolution, order, and calm in a world outside of our control. What few believers see is that religion claims authority by preying on our fears, all the while attempting to establish a universal norm that relies heavily on personal narrative, a grand scheme that artificially supports religious presuppositions. But the foundation on which the Church's power relies, faith, and authority, is built on unstable ground. Many members of the Clergy Project, when faced with hypocrisy or injustice within their religious traditions, began to question their faith. For me, one incident that negatively and seriously influenced my perception of the Church, and one that I now see as a touchstone for my later doubts, occurred when I was 15 years old. You cannot be a Catholic or a former Catholic without some opinion on clergy sexual misconduct. Beginning in the late 1980s, a series of sexual abuse scandals made international news, rocking the faith of many Catholics. At the time, people in the church I attended were shocked, but they ultimately dismissed such horrid events as isolated incidents. No one was willing to imagine the possibility that child abuse was widely prevalent. Nor was anyone willing to admit that the church would ever attempt to ignore or even hide such a systemic problem. As a young parishioner, I was among those who never doubted the unassailable goodness and wisdom of the church and its priests. That all changed in my teenage years, when my diocese in Antigonish, Nova Scotia, like countless others around the world, witnessed its own child abuse scandal. In this instance, my parish priest, Father Claude Richard, along with his twin brother, also a priest, were the abusers. Unlike many other cases where complaints about a predatory priest led to nothing more than a molesting priest's reassignment to a new parish, both of these men were eventually formally charged and convicted. I knew Father Richard. I was one of his altar servers on the rotation for the Sunday morning liturgy. I remember him as always happy to see the youth of the parish. His round face and receding hairline only further disarmed people. He did not look like a predator, but he was one. He often hosted youth events in the parish glebe house. He, along with his brother, would arrange for pizza nights for altar servers. They would put on a little show and delight us with songs and jokes. I don't recall observing anything out of the ordinary at these events. We had no idea what a monster lay beneath this kindly exterior. One day, Father Richard left the parish abruptly. I didn't know what happened, but several months later, I began to hear the whispers. As my diocese began to swarm with the stories about Father Richard and his brother and others, a large sex abuse scandal erupted in an adjacent diocese which was covered widely in the news. There were widespread allegations of sexual abuse of children under the care of the Christian Brothers at Mount Casual Orphanage, with approximately 300 victims coming forward. Bishop Colin Campbell attempted to protect the reputation of the priesthood in the Diocese of Antigonish and the church by publicly dismissing the accusations made by the victims. In the Casket, yes, that's its real name, a community newspaper, he wrote, "If the victims were adolescents, why did they go back to the same situation once there had been one pass or suggestion? Were they cooperating in the matter, or were they true victims?" Church leaders read this letter from every pulpit in every church in my diocese. I remember sitting in the pew next to my mother as the bishops, and by extension, the church's opinions of the victims were made plain to parishioners. Audible gasps could be heard peppered throughout the very still sanctuary. Traumatized by news of the scandal, which included friends and family of those in the pews, people had been waiting for a pastoral and loving message. What they got instead were the angry ramblings of an embattled oligarch, completely lacking in empathy. I sat silent in the church, processing what I had heard, feeling it echo in my head like an unwelcome thought. A few months after that, the bishop issued his horrendous proclamation. My mother sent me to our diocese summer youth camp for girls. After surveying the rundown cabins and the shabby grounds, I did not expect much from this week-long expedition. The camp was populated by 50 teenage girls who were each sent to this Catholic youth ministry to help encourage and foster their faith. Though we were teenagers with all the obvious distractions, the recent events in the diocese and the comments of the bishop were frequently discussed and privately admonished. Attending the camp with me was a young woman, the target of a predatory teacher who had refused to be defined by the circumstances that surrounded her. The story of her attack at the hands of a trusted educator had been splashed all over the local newspapers, though her identity had been protected. Despite these challenges, despite these challenging circumstances, she refused to adhere to the role of the victim. Her emotional maturity and refusal to be silenced inspired us all. On Wednesday of that week, the camp administrators announced we would be having a special guest the following day. The camp was abuzz as we speculated about who would be coming. Just before the dinner bell rang, the next day, just before the dinner bell rang, Bishop Campbell pulled up with his entourage in a black Lincoln. Our excitement immediately dimmed. Smiling broadly, he appeared to be expecting a throng of adoring and diminutive pupils. Camp counselors ushered us into the mess hall with little fanfare. After the meal, they directed us to rearrange the seats into rows and to sit down. The bishop went to the lectern to speak to the uncomfortably captive audience. We all stared at him, wondering what his goal was. He began prattling on about Jesus and the church and love and salvation, all the usual stuff. In the middle of his presentation, the young woman stood up. She had a question. The bishop stopped, looked down at her with what appeared to be hopeful expectation. Politely but firmly, she asked him why he had issued such a hateful statement about the victims of predatory priests. He sputtered. His face rapidly transitioned from pale pink to a flustered red. Sucking in his breath, he admonished her. "How dare you ask such a question? Do you not understand that my priests were the victims? Those adolescents were responsible," he charged, scowling, "as they were the tempters." I sat there in my rickety chair, stunned. His outrage at her perceived insubordination reduced him to a vicious, angry man. Gripping the lectern tightly, his hands trembled with rage. His shoulders tensing, he began to ridicule her, saying that she was too young to understand and that she had no right to question his authority or opinions. He was her bishop, after all. At the end of this diatribe, she turned around and walked out on him. The rest of us got up and followed her out the door. So there's a little taste of woman power. All right, so I have no idea what time it is. Okay, I am going to move on to, all right, I should have made that change. I'm going to talk a little bit about rational doubt because that's what I'm working on right now, and it is related to the Clergy Project because it was started by a Clergy Project founder and a founding member, myself. So it is a blog on the Patheos platform. I'm not sure if you know what Patheos is, but if you've read The Friendly Atheist, then you've been on Patheos. And we are there on the Atheist channel, which is a really interesting place to be, because when you know someone writes something that's anti the Catholic Church, there's Catholic bloggers on Patheos that will come over and complain in our comments about how dare you hurt the church's overly sensitive opinions of itself. So yeah, so rational doubt is bringing together, it's kind of like bringing the Clergy Project out to the public. So it's a public place. So members of the project can contribute, and many do, and they tell their stories. So I would highly recommend, if you're interested in hearing individual stories about Clergy Project members and their process, to visit Rational Doubt. And then, you know, if you know someone that is closeted, this would be a good first step for them too, to come and to see this dialogue and see what the conversations are about. We have had the experience that people, you know, who are doubting clergy have come and they've discovered that there's a safe place to talk about these things, because I think it does need to be talked about. And I wish that when I was going through that process, I had a place to go to talk. It really would have helped me. So now I have some other recommended reading. I should have had the other books that I mentioned in this, but I kind of ran out of time and ran into computer technology glitches. But I wanted to mention this book because it's kind of my sister book. This is Dan Dennett and Linda Lascola's book, Caught in the Pulpit, which is the second round of interviews with non-believing clergy, and I'm actually in this book too. So I guess it's another plug for me if you want to read this. But the other interesting thing about this book is it's right now being made into a play. So in New York, there's a New York playwright who is in the process of writing this. It's already gone through its first reading, and so at some point, hopefully not too far off Broadway, Caught in the Pulpit will be available for a viewing audience, which will be really, really amazing to see this story.